Jessica Miller tallied the bills inside her time-worn leather wallet, similar to counting breaths during a surge of anxiety. With care and deliberation, she hoped the figures would somehow change with enough staring, but they didn't. A pair of fives, a trio of ones, along with some coins that made a clinking sound against the lining. Payday was still several days away. On the surface next to the wallet was a grocery list she had already revised 3 times, deleting anything that seemed like an extravagance: berries, nice coffee, deli turkey, until only milk, eggs, bread, and the cheapest pasta options were left. Outside the kitchen's window, the overcast Pittsburgh sky seemed to weigh down on the row houses like a massive hand. "Jess, are you ready?" Michael's voice echoed from the hallway, filled with warmth and anticipation, yet already tinged with the gentle apology he reserved for situations involving his mom. He came into the doorway, fastening his coat, his cheeks flushed from the cold and his hair still a bit damp near his temples. "If we want to avoid the traffic on Bigelow, we ought to leave now." She put the wallet in her purse and shut the grocery list inside a drawer. "Yep," she replied, her voice even. Practice had allowed her to soften the sharp edges. "Mom's been calling since 8, he added, flashing a quick smile as he checked his pockets for his keys. "She seemed tired this morning. I think a good cake might lift her spirits." There it was. The cake, the unspoken fee for their visits. Jessica tucked a curl behind her ear and consciously relaxed her shoulders. "Giant Eagle?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Market District on Liberty," he responded, his face brightening. "They have that chocolate tort. She just loves the one with the glossy top." She pictured that glossy top and its equally glossy price tag, a small marquee of numbers that would devour her 2 5s and then some. "Sure," she answered, wishing the word didn't feel quite so much like defeat. They drove through Bloomfield, passing the brick-faced shops and cramped stoops where the day hadn't fully begun. The windshield wipers squeaked against a windshield coated with light drizzle, and a radio played something upbeat that didn't match the tightness in Jessica's chest. Michael drove as he typically did when they were going to see his mother, carefully, with a kind of concentrated hopefulness, as if keeping the car steady could somehow keep everything else that way too. "How's the budget looking?" he asked softly as they waited at a red light. She felt the kindness of the question and its weight balanced on a fine point. "We're doing fine," she said. Another even-toned response. She glanced at him, taking in the familiar kindness of his profile, his unwavering optimism. He was a good man, always had been. Sometimes, though, goodness could lean too far in one direction. Giant Eagle's doors slid open, releasing a rush of warm air and a sugary scent. A display of cakes shone under the lights. Strawberries gleamed, lacquered like tiny hearts. Ganache so smooth it could reflect an image. Michael went straight to the display case as if summoned. He rocked back and forth on his heels, his hands in his pockets, as he considered the sizes. "That one," he decided, pointing to the 12-inch tort that could easily serve a small gathering. "She'll really get a kick out of it." Jessica visually measured the cake's diameter. It was beautiful, unnecessary, and exactly what he wanted to give. "That's a lot of cake," she said gently. "She can freeze slices," he offered cheerfully. "Or we could invite the neighbors." She nodded. "Okay." The word felt a bit forced this time. While the bakery worker boxed the tort and tied it with a red ribbon that made it look like a holiday gift, Jessica wandered to the aisle end where paper towels were on sale and mentally calculated the value of coupons versus pride. She picked up the cheapest 2-pack, then put it back. Payday. Just wait until payday. They stood in line at the checkout. A shopping cart rattled somewhere behind them. A child's laughter echoed from near the pharmacy. A scanner beeped rhythmically. Jessica rested her hands on the cart's handle, focusing on even breaths and letting the bright lights blur. When their turn arrived, the cashier greeted them with a practiced friendliness that still felt genuine. She was middle-aged, with sharp eyes behind square-framed glasses, and her hair pulled back with a sparkly clip. Her plastic name tag read Tammy. "Well, hey there," Tammy said, carefully sliding the cake box across the scanner as if it were a newborn. "Someone's celebrating." "It's for my mom," Michael said, leaning in slightly. "We thought we'd surprise her." Tammy's smile warmed. "That Helen sure has a sweet tooth. She's in here every week." The scanner beeped. She lowered her voice, conspiratorial but kind. "She's one of my favorites. Always so put together." And that gentleman she comes in with, what a charmer. He treats her like a queen. A tiny click sounded in Jessica's mind, the sound of a door unlocking without anyone touching it. "I'm sorry," she asked, keeping her voice level. Tammy didn't notice the shift. She was still in the gentle flow of small talk. "She's just lovely, the coat, the hair, the perfume, like a Sunday matinee star. And he's always telling jokes, paying with that gold card, tipping the baggers like it's Christmas." She winked. "Goals, if you ask me." Michael's smile didn't waver, but it paused. "My mother is Helen Miller, and him," Tammy said. "Tall, silver hair, classy as can be. You two look alike around the eyes." She gestured toward the bagging area. "I usually see them midweek. They pick up the nice things, imported cheese, the good coffee, those little jars of jam with the checkered lids. I keep meaning to ask what kind of perfume she wears." The register printed a total that landed heavily. Jessica reached for her wallet automatically, then remembered and dropped her hand. Michael had already taken out his card. The strip of receipt paper unfurled. "Hope she enjoys her cake," Tammy said, tearing the receipt with a crisp snap. "Give her my best." "Thanks," Michael murmured. His voice sounded normal to anyone else anyway. Jessica knew precisely how far off it was. They stepped out into air that smelled faintly of rain and car exhaust. Michael carried the cake box with both hands carefully, as he had carried their nephew at his christening. Jessica matched his pace, the automatic choreography of years. The automatic movements ended at the curb. "She must be mistaking her for someone else," Michael said as they reached the car, trying for lightness but missing the mark. "Maybe," Jessica said. She opened the passenger door and got in, her bag on her lap, her hands on the zipper as if it could keep something closed inside her. In her mind, Tammy's description hung like a framed picture. Silver hair, the mink, the perfume, a man with a gold card and a laugh that turned heads. She tried to place beside it the picture she already knew by heart. Helen in a faded sweater, Helen with softly trembling hands, Helen saying the heat bill would eat her alive, Helen sighing into the phone about the weight of being alone. The two images refused to align. Michael set the cake on the back seat with reverence and slid behind the wheel. He started the engine but didn't shift out of park. "She's been lonely," he said, as if offering a defense to a courtroom no one else could see. "It would be nice if she had friends." "It would," Jessica said. "She wouldn't tell me," he added after a moment, and the double negative hung between them until it faded into silence. They pulled out onto Liberty Avenue, passing the street where the florist had stacked buckets of chrysanthemums in chalky colors. Traffic moved slowly, a line of brake lights snaking toward the Strip District. Michael hummed under his breath, the tuneless sound he made when he wanted the car's interior to feel normal. Jessica watched raindrops bead on the side mirror and run in narrow trails, each drop finding its own path before inevitably merging with another. She told herself not to jump to conclusions. She told herself that Tammy might be mistaken, that memory could play tricks, that kind cashiers sometimes stitched patterns out of coincidences. But the words gentleman and gold card tugged at her, and the way the cashier had said every week, like a bell tolling in rhythm with their budget, a study in contrasts. The pantry at home with its rows of store-brand labels versus the image of imported cheese and little jars of jam with checkered lids. Michael turned on to Bigelow. "Mom's going to love this," he said, looking at her as if seeking permission to believe it. "She will," Jessica said, because she didn't know what else to offer him. She watched the city rise and fold around them. The bridges, the brown river, the gentle hills cradling neighborhoods like cupped hands. Somewhere in that wide, gray morning, something small inside her shifted from wish to doubt. It wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It quietly took the passenger seat beside her and buckled up. Jessica excused herself from Michael with a quick smile, murmuring something about needing the restroom before they headed back. He nodded, too preoccupied with balancing the cake box on his arm to question her. She slipped away, weaving past the lottery kiosk and the floral section, then down the side corridor leading toward the delivery entrance. The hum of refrigeration units deepened as she pushed open the heavy door into the gray drizzle behind Giant Eagle. The air smelled of wet cardboard and exhaust fumes. A line of delivery trucks idled, their drivers smoking or hunched over clipboards. Jessica tightened her coat and stepped toward the corner, intending only to steal a quiet breath away from the fluorescent brightness inside. That's when she heard the click of heels. Sharp, deliberate. Not the shuffle of a tired shopper, but the confident rhythm of someone arriving with purpose. She turned. Helen Miller emerged from the shadows of a black sedan as if stepping onto a stage. Gone was the frail widow who complained about drafty windows and rising heating bills. This woman moved with practiced elegance. A mink coat brushed her calves. Silver hair styled into soft waves. Lips painted a deep berry red. The drizzle didn't touch her. The umbrella that popped open above her shimmered in lacquered black. At her side, holding the umbrella with casual gallantry, walked a man Jessica had never seen before. He was older, broad-shouldered despite a slight stoop. His suit so well-tailored it announced its price even before he spoke. A scarf of pale cashmere rested at his throat. His hand rested lightly against Helen's back as he guided her toward the sliding glass doors. His laughter, low, easy, carried across the parking lot. Jessica's pulse quickened. The image clashed so starkly with the Helen she knew that her mind stuttered, struggling to reconcile cardigan and mink, trembling hands and jeweled rings. She shrank against the brick wall, hoping the umbrella would angle just so, concealing her. They passed close enough that she could smell the perfume. Something rich, layered with musk and rose, and then they were inside, absorbed by the warm buzz of shoppers. Jessica hesitated only a moment before following. Through the glass, she saw them glide past the produce section. Helen's coat swung, the man leaning close as if every word she spoke was priceless. Jessica ducked behind a display of canned soup, her heart hammering. From there, she watched them pause in front of the wine aisle. He reached for 2 bottles without hesitation, Bordeaux reds with labels she recognized only from glossy magazines. He added imported cheese, prosciutto wrapped in butcher paper, chocolate truffles in a gold box. Each item landed in the cart like punctuation. At the register, he produced a sleek black card from his wallet, the kind that bent light differently, metal rather than plastic. The cashier's smile widened. Jessica's stomach sank as the total flashed. More than her family spent in a week. The man signed without glancing at the amount, his pen stroke bold, a signature of entitlement. Helen laughed at something he whispered, tilting her head back in a way Jessica had never witnessed, carefree, indulgent like a woman decades younger. The cashier slipped the bottles into paper bags, and Helen accepted them with hands steady as marble. Jessica's chest tightened. The sound of her own heartbeat filled her ears, too loud for the store's quiet hum. She gripped the cart she had abandoned near the soup display until her knuckles went white. This wasn't a cashier's mistaken kindness. This wasn't a coincidence. This was her husband's mother parading through giant eagle in furs and perfume, treated like royalty by a man whose very posture announced money. The images clashed violently with the calls that came each week. Michael, sweetheart, the medication is so expensive. Jessica, I don't know how I'll cover the electric this month. Every night is so cold alone. Jessica pressed her lips together until they hurt. She wanted to march across the tiles to confront, to demand, to shatter the illusion. But Michael waited outside with a cake, ribbon for celebration, his eyes still tender with hope. She couldn't, not yet. She turned, forcing herself through the opposite exit, letting the drizzle sting her cheeks until her breathing steadied. The world blurred at the edges, rain merging with the heat in her eyes. She rejoined Michael by the car, his smile instant, his arms protective around the box. The drive to Helen's apartment was a silent play of unspoken lines. Jessica stared at the passing streets, the rows of old brick houses sagging under years of weather. Her thoughts chased themselves in frantic circles. Had this been going on for months, years? Did Michael know? Was he blinded or complicit, or simply a son who refused to see? By the time they reached Lawrenceville, Jessica's hands ached from being clenched in her lap. Michael parked on the narrow street outside Helen's building, a squat complex with peeling paint and a lobby that smelled of boiled cabbage. He carried the cake with reverence up the creaking stairs. Helen opened the door before they knocked. The woman who stood there was not the one Jessica had just seen. Her hair was pinned in a loose bun, wisps escaping, her sweater pilled at the elbows. She clutched a tissue in one hand, as if she had been crying. "Oh, my darlings," she breathed, pressing her fingers to her chest. "You came." Her voice trembled with the fatigue of martyrdom. She coughed delicately, turning aside as if embarrassed by the sound. The air in the apartment smelled of mothballs and reheated cabbage rolls. A single bulb cast a yellow gloom. Michael's face softened instantly. "Mom, you should be resting." Helen waved a dismissive hand. "Resting, fretting. It's all the same when you're alone. The nights stretch on so long." She dabbed her eyes with the tissue, then brightened weakly at the sight of the cake. "Oh, Michael, you shouldn't have spent so much on me." Jessica stood at the threshold, her gaze darting between the frayed carpet underfoot and the memory of mink brushing against marble tile. The contrast was so sharp it felt cruel. Helen lowered herself onto the couch like a frail heroine in a melodrama, sighing about aches, about medicine, about solitude. Jessica, silent, carried the vision of imported wine and gold cards in the back of her mind, where it throbbed like a secret wound. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the radiator kicking on and off. Jessica lay awake beside Michael, staring at the shadows that stretched across the ceiling. Her husband's breathing was steady, softened by sleep. Every rise and fall of his chest seemed to widen the distance between them. She turned on her side, pressing her knees toward her stomach as if curling tighter might shrink the images replaying in her mind. Helen's mink coat glistening under the supermarket lights, the perfume clinging to the air, the way she laughed beside the well-dressed man who carried himself as if Pittsburgh belonged to him. Jessica squeezed her eyes shut, willing the memory away. It returned sharper, brighter. Helen tilting her head back, laughter like champagne. Helen accepting bottles of imported Bordeaux without trembling hands. The man sliding a card from his wallet, black and gleaming, paying for luxuries without flinching. She sat up, restless. The clock glowed 2:17 a.m. The air smelled faintly of cake frosting from the box in their kitchen. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and walked barefoot into the living room, wrapping herself in a blanket. On the table lay the unopened bills she'd been avoiding. Credit card statements, utility notices, reminders of rent due. Jessica grabbed a notepad and began scribbling. Something she did when her mind raced, breaking the chaos into numbers. Michael's monthly paycheck after taxes, about $3,200. How much did he send Helen automatically each month? $1,500. Groceries for Helen, care packages, he called them, averaged $600. Then came the emergencies. A leaking pipe here, a prescription refill there. Always urgent, never optional. Easily another $500 a month. $1,500 plus $600 plus $500. $2,600 out of $3,200. That left barely enough for their own rent, bills and groceries. No wonder she was crossing berries off the list. Her pen hovered above the page. 2 words circled in her mind. Almost everything. Almost everything they earned poured into Helen's life of supposed hardship. And yet she'd walked through Giant Eagle draped in mink, with nails polished and cheeks glowing under expensive makeup. Jessica set the pen down and pressed her forehead into her hands. The radiator hissed, then fell silent again. Somewhere outside, a train horn moaned through the night, low and lonely. By dawn, her body ached from fatigue, though sleep had never come. She dressed quietly and made coffee, sipping it black. Michael shuffled in, bleary-eyed but smiling, still humming with the simple joy of having delivered his mother a cake. He kissed her cheek and she tried to return the smile. The phone rang mid-morning. Michael answered, his voice brightening immediately. "Hi, Mom." He paced the kitchen as he listened. Jessica sipped her coffee and watched his shoulders tense. "She's not doing well," he whispered when he covered the receiver. "Her heart again. She says the doctor prescribed something new." He uncovered the phone, nodding. "Yes, Mom. Of course. How much is it?" Jessica's stomach clenched. She already knew the answer wouldn't be small. $280, Michael repeated, his hand already moving toward his wallet. "Don't worry, I'll transfer it right now." Jessica set her mug down too hard. It clinked against the counter. Michael glanced at her, then turned away, rattling off reassurances into the phone. When he hung up, he pulled out his debit card. "It's a brand-name medication," he said quickly, as if bracing for her reaction. "You know how insurance is. The good stuff is always out of pocket." Jessica swallowed her protest, but something inside her refused to stay still. "What's it called?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then showed her the scribbled name on a piece of paper. Jessica memorized it. Later, while Michael showered, she drove to CVS. The pharmacist tapped the name into the computer, adjusting her glasses. "Yes, that's available," she said. "But there's a generic exact same active ingredient. Costs about $18. 18. The word thudded in Jessica's chest. 18, not 280. The pharmacist gave her a sympathetic look. Some doctors insist on brand name, but for most patients, generic is perfectly fine. Insurance usually covers it, too. Did the doctor specifically write dispense as written? Jessica shook her head. "I don't think so." "Well then," the pharmacist said. She could fill the generic at any pharmacy. Same benefit, huge difference in cost. Jessica thanked her and walked out, the cold air sharp against her skin. She sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel, her eyes burning. $280 had vanished from their account while $18 would have done the same job. When she got home, she found Michael rinsing dishes. He smiled absently. "Mom says she already feels better. Just knowing she can get the meds." Jessica bit her tongue until the taste of metal filled her mouth. She couldn't bear to crush him yet, not without proof he couldn't deny. That night, she pulled out the notepad again. At the top of the page, she wrote in capital letters, "Money to Helen." She dated the first entry. $1,500 monthly transfer. Next line. $600 groceries average. Next line. $280 medication brand. She flipped to a new page, wrote the word generic in bold, and beneath it, $18. The contrast screamed at her. From that night forward, she resolved that nothing would slip past her. Every call, every dollar, every excuse would be logged. If Michael couldn't see the truth, she would gather it piece by piece until the weight of evidence was undeniable. Jessica closed the notebook, slid it into her nightstand drawer, and lay down beside her husband. His breathing soon evened out, but her eyes stayed open in the dark, wide and unblinking. The first week of February dragged itself through Pittsburgh like a half-frozen river. Ice clung to gutters. Buses hissed along Liberty Avenue, and Jessica counted the days until payday the way sailors once counted stars. She came home late from work one evening, her shoulders stiff from the cold, to find Michael already on the phone. His tone, gentle, coaxing, told her exactly who was on the other end. She dropped her bag by the door and listened. "Of course, Mom," Michael was saying, pacing between the kitchen and living room. "I'll take care of it. Don't worry." He paused, nodding to a voice she couldn't hear. Yes, I know how hard winter can be in that building." Jessica's pulse quickened. She mouthed the words, "What is it now?" But he turned away, his hand tightening around the phone. When he finally hung up, he exhaled heavily, like someone carrying another's burden. "Her utilities," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. $800 this month. The heating's brutal in a place that old. Jessica froze. $800 for a one-bedroom in Lawrenceville? Michael's eyes darted toward her, wary. "It's possible. Those old radiators, the drafty windows, no separate meters." "No," Jessica cut in, her voice sharper than she intended. "Michael, we pay barely half that here. And this apartment isn't exactly new construction." He set the phone down as if it were fragile glass. "She's 72, Jess. She can't sit in the cold. Maybe she keeps it warmer than we do. Maybe the building charges a flat rate." Jessica inhaled slowly, fighting to steady herself. $800. The number scraped across her mind like metal against stone. She imagined the receipt book already bulging with entries. $1,500 transfer, $280 medication, and now this. Her pen itched to write the next line. She's lying. The thought pulsed, but she swallowed it back. Saying it aloud would shatter something she wasn't ready to break. Instead, she forced her tone softer. "Did she show you the bill?" Michael hesitated. "She doesn't need to show me. She wouldn't make something like that up." Jessica almost laughed. The sound would have been bitter. She remembered the mink coat swinging under supermarket lights, the perfume that lingered like smoke. She remembered imported wine tucked into paper bags while Helen played the pauper at home. Her husband's faith in his mother was a wall she couldn't climb. "Okay," Jessica whispered, nodding. "If you think it's right." Michael relaxed, relief softening his features. He kissed her cheek in gratitude, oblivious to the storm he had just left raging inside her. "You're the best," he murmured. That night, Jessica opened her notebook after he fell asleep. She added a new line in neat block letters: $800 utilities. Her pen pressed so hard the paper almost tore. She lay awake staring at the numbers, each one a thread in the web tightening around them. The money bled from their account like a slow, deliberate wound. Every time she tried to breathe, the thought circled back. Helen isn't struggling, she's taking. The next few days crawled by. Jessica watched Michael skip his own lunch to cover the utility payment without hesitation. She listened to him reassure his mother with the kind of devotion most men reserved for their spouses. The tenderness would have been beautiful if it weren't built on deceit. At work, she found herself distracted, her mind replaying scenarios in which she demanded proof, held the bill in her hand, circled the lie in red ink. In each daydream, Michael's face crumpled. Not at his mother's deception, but at Jessica's audacity to accuse. The fear of that look kept her silent, but silence did nothing to cool the fire inside. It grew hotter each day she carried groceries into their kitchen and thought of Helen laughing over imported cheese. It burned every time she folded their modest laundry while picturing Helen draped in furs. The sense of being used was no longer a suspicion. It had settled into her bones, heavy and undeniable. On Sunday, they drove back to Lawrenceville with a trunk full of food Michael had insisted on buying. Jessica carried the bags up the stairs, her arms aching, and watched Helen greet them at the door. The woman wore the same pilled cardigan, her hair pinned loosely, her eyes moist as she murmured about the cold draft in her apartment. $800, Jessica thought, staring at the flimsy curtains pulled across the windows. $800 for a performance. Helen pressed a hand to her chest, thanking Michael with dramatic fervor. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, complaining softly about the weight of loneliness, the burden of bills, the cruel winter. Michael sat at her side, his hand covering hers, his face open and kind. He didn't see the cracks in the mask. Jessica stood back, arms folded, the groceries lined up like props on Helen's table. She swallowed her anger, locked it tight behind her teeth, and told herself again what she already knew. Every lie would be written down, every dollar would be accounted for. If Michael needed proof carved in stone, she would gather it piece by piece until the wall of his faith finally collapsed under the weight of truth. For now she stayed quiet. For now she endured. But the doubt was no longer a flicker in the corner of her mind. It had become a steady flame, burning through every word Helen spoke. Jessica called in sick on a Wednesday. The lie slid too easily from her lips, the kind of lie born not from malice, but from desperation. She left the apartment just after dawn, notebook tucked in her bag, and drove across the city until she reached Lawrenceville. The streets were still damp from an early rain, the row houses glistening like old bricks freshly scrubbed. She parked 2 blocks away and walked to a corner cafe opposite Helen's building. The cafe smelled of burnt espresso and cinnamon. Jessica ordered the cheapest coffee on the menu and claimed a window seat. From there, she had a clear view of Helen's front door. Minutes stretched. Jessica sipped the bitter coffee and tried not to fidget. She felt half like a detective and half like a trespasser in her own family. What if Helen really was struggling, and Jessica was building monsters out of shadows? But the images of mink, perfume, and imported wine wouldn't leave. At 10:47, the building's front door creaked open. Helen emerged, transformed again. No cardigan today, instead a cream-colored cashmere coat, a silk scarf tied neatly under her chin, her hair styled in a way no cheap apartment mirror could accomplish. Jessica's stomach clenched. Helen tapped her phone and within minutes, a sleek black SUV pulled to the curb. An Uber, Jessica noted. The driver stepped out to open the door for her. Helen slid in with the grace of someone who expected doors to be opened. Jessica tossed a few bills on the table and hurried outside. She hailed her own Uber, her breath fogging in the cold air. "Follow that black SUV," she told the driver before catching herself. The man raised an eyebrow. "Just heading to Altius. You can take the same route." Her voice trembled, but the driver only shrugged and pulled into traffic. The ride wound past bridges and warehouses until the downtown skyline loomed, the Monongahela River glinting dully under the pale winter sun. The black SUV stopped in front of Altius, one of Pittsburgh's crown jewels, perched high with a panoramic view of the city's rivers and hills. Jessica's driver dropped her off a block away. She lingered outside, nerves buzzing, then pushed through the glass doors into a wash of soft jazz and polished wood. Inside, Altius glowed with wealth. Waiters in crisp black uniforms glided between white linen tables. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the river like a painting. Jessica requested a table at the far side of the dining room, claiming she was waiting for a friend. She ordered the cheapest salad on the menu, $114, and clutched the leather-bound menu as if it were a shield. From her vantage point, she could see Helen near the center of the room. Sitting across from her was the man Jessica had glimpsed before, Thomas Harrington. His presence filled the space without effort. His tailored suit gleamed dark against the white tablecloth, and his watch flashed under the light with every flick of his hand. The waiter poured wine into crystal glasses, something deep and red, the kind that left slow trails along the glass. Helen lifted her glass with elegance, her laugh ringing like a practiced performance. Jessica leaned slightly, pretending to study her phone, her ears straining. The murmur of voices and clinking cutlery blurred everything, but then Harrington's words carried clearly in a lull between conversations. $2,000 a week, as always. Jessica's fork slipped against the porcelain plate, the sound sharp enough to make her flinch. She lowered her gaze quickly, praying no one had noticed. $2,000 a week? $8,000 a month. More than triple what she and Michael scraped together after bills. Helen's smile widened as she tilted her glass toward him. "You're too generous," she purred, though her eyes glittered with satisfaction. Jessica felt heat rise in her chest, her hand trembling as she picked at her salad, the lettuce wilting beneath the vinaigrette. She wanted to scream across the room, to drag Michael there, to force him to see his mother feasting while they rationed pennies. The waiter returned to Helen and Harrington's table with silver-domed plates. He lifted the lids to reveal seared filet mignon, lobster tails dripping with butter, sides arranged like artwork. Jessica glanced at the menu. Each entree ran $60 to $80. With appetizers, wine, dessert, and coffee, she estimated the bill would easily climb past $400. When the check arrived, Harrington slipped out the same black card Jessica had seen at Giant Eagle. He added a tip without hesitation. Jessica glimpsed the number. $100. Her throat tightened. That tip alone could have covered their electric bill for a month. Jessica forced herself to breathe evenly, to stay seated until her own meager plate was cleared. She asked for the check, signing it with hands that felt suddenly foreign. Her total, $16.90 with tax and tip. Even that stung. She rose slowly, tucking her notebook under her arm. On the page inside, she had scrawled the words while pretending to check her phone. Altius $2,000 a week for $100 meal, $100 tip. She walked out into the cold, the river wind biting through her coat. Standing on the overlook, she could see the bridges arcing like ribs across the water. For a moment the city felt like a stage set, every building painted to hide the rock beneath. Tears threatened, hot and unwelcome, but she swallowed them back. There was no time for collapse. Proof mattered more than tears. Jessica lifted her phone and snapped a photo of Altius, then another of the Uber idling at the curb, Harrington's silhouette visible through the tinted window as Helen slid in beside him. She pressed the images into memory, into evidence. Then she turned away, the notebook heavy in her bag, and walked back toward her car. The city lights shimmered across the river, each reflection trembling as though even steel bridges couldn't hold steady against the truth she now carried. The call came just after dinner on a Sunday evening. Michael had barely set his fork down when his phone buzzed on the table. He answered without hesitation, his voice softening the instant he heard his mother's name on the line. Jessica watched his expression shift from mild fatigue to alarm. "What? Slow down, Mom. Tell me exactly what happened." He pressed a palm to his forehead. The bathroom pipe burst, flooded into the neighbor's apartment. His chair scraped back from the table. $4,000 in damages. Jessica felt her stomach sink for $1,000. It was the kind of sum that could unravel them completely. Michael covered the receiver and turned to her, panic in his eyes. "She says water poured down into the unit below. The neighbors are demanding immediate payment for repairs. She doesn't have it, Jess. I'll transfer the money tonight." Her fork clattered onto her plate. "Michael, wait. You're going to send thousands of dollars without even seeing it. She wouldn't make this up. he shot back, his voice tight. She sounded terrified. Jessica steadied her breath. All the more reason to check. If the pipe really burst, there should be water everywhere. Let's drive over tonight. He hesitated, torn between loyalty and reason. It's late. So is wiring $4,000 you can't spare, she countered. The silence stretched. Finally, Michael grabbed his coat. Fine, but only so she doesn't panic. They drove through streets slick with melting snow, the city lights casting fractured reflections on the wet asphalt. Michael's jaw was clenched, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. Jessica sat rigid in the passenger seat, clutching her notebook as though the weight of proof alone could keep them from sinking. When they reached Helen's building, the hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and disinfectant, same as always. Helen opened the door before they knocked. Her face was a mask of anguish, her eyes red-rimmed, a tissue clutched in one hand. "Oh, thank God," she cried, pressing a hand to her chest. "It was a disaster, water everywhere. I don't know how I'll ever pay Mr. Donnelly downstairs. He's threatening to call a lawyer." Jessica stepped past her without a word and walked straight to the bathroom. She flipped on the light. The linoleum gleamed. The tiles were bone-dry, not a drop of water on the floor. No warped wood, no damp towels. The air smelled faintly of lavender cleaner, not mildew. Her pulse pounded as she crouched to examine the pipes under the sink. Shiny, intact. No sign of a wrench ever touching them. Behind her, Helen's voice wavered from the living room. "I cleaned up as best I could. You wouldn't believe the mess." Jessica straightened slowly. "Michael," she called, her tone sharp. "Come look." He appeared in the doorway, confusion shadowing his face. His eyes swept over the spotless room, the pristine walls. "Mom, where's the damage?" Helen wrung her hands. I scrubbed for hours. You know how quickly I can get things tidy." Jessica bit back a bitter laugh. A burst pipe doesn't vanish with scrubbing. The floor would be soaked, the walls stained. And if it leaked into the apartment below? She spun toward Michael. "Let's ask the neighbor." Helen flinched. "That's not necessary." But Jessica was already moving. She marched down the stairwell, her footsteps echoing. Michael followed reluctantly, torn between mother and wife. On the floor below, she knocked on the first door she found. A middle-aged man in sweatpants and slippers answered, blinking at them. "Evening. Sorry to bother you," Jessica said evenly. "I'm Jessica Miller. Upstairs visiting Helen. She said there was flooding from her bathroom into your unit. Did you notice any water damage?" The man's brows furrowed. "Flooding? No. Everything's fine down here."